What's up, party people? Welcome to our online service. My name is Addie. If you are new here, you came at the perfect time because we're starting a brand new series called Rebellious. And I know what you're thinking. Why are we talking about being rebellious in church? Well, we're talking about rebelling against the world to follow Jesus and his plan for us. It's gonna be great. Let's get into the message.
Hey everyone, welcome to our new series called Rebellious. And this is going to be a 2-week series, and you'll be able to tell if you are rebellious or not. So let's start with a good rant, all right? I like to have my good rants going on. So, can I tell you one thing that makes me just furious? It's when adults around me talk badly about teenagers, about you guys. And so here's what I mean. Sometimes I'll be on a plane and the person in the seat next to me says, "What do you do?" So I tell them, "Well, I work with teenagers." And now, the minute I say that, I get one of two reactions. The first one is, "That's awesome." And they're totally right. Or the second one is, "Oh, I'm sorry. I could never do that." Then they go on to give me a list of all the reasons they don't like teenagers. And I know it's rude and it bothers me too. And the truth is, sometimes I think people in middle school and high school get stereotyped in a way that's really unfair. In fact, I group texted a few of our influencers a question, and I asked, "What are some negative stereotypes people have about teenagers?" And here's what they said. They said that all they want to do is party, or that they all do drugs or they vape, or that they all start drama, or that they're lazy and addicted to social media, or that they don't understand life or they don't have to work as hard themselves, or that they're selfish and they only care about themselves, that they can't last without their phone, or that they wear inappropriate clothes, or they don't act their age even though they're teenagers and they're complaining that they should be adults. I don't know, whatever. But sometimes teenagers get labeled as lazy, entitled, but the label that bugs me the most is this one, that they're rebellious. Being rebellious just means that you don't always follow the rules. And when I hear a statement like, "Oh, teenagers are just rebellious," I want to ask the question, well, have you met every single teenager? Because the truth is, you can't just put everyone in the same category like that. And is being rebellious always a bad thing? Because the truth is, whether you consider yourself rebellious or not, whether you love rules or whether you hate them, our world has a lot of them. And you know this. School is full of rules, like don't run in the hallways, or don't FaceTime people in other classrooms, or that you have to keep your Zoom camera on and you can't go into the hide mode, for those of you who are still on Zoom. But there are probably some rules at your house also that have to do with maybe your curfew, or the time that you spend on your phone, or maybe cleaning up after yourself, especially the dishes or something like that. These rules are pretty obvious. But then there are the unspoken, unmentioned, but everybody still knows it rules. Like you don't respond to a text message by calling someone, like, ever. You just respond with a text. That's what you're supposed to do. Or you don't laugh when your friend says something dumb in class, because then that means you'd be a bad friend and you'd make them feel bad. Or you don't ever, and I mean ever, screenshot a Snapchat without an explanation. All right. So the point is, our world has a lot of rules. And so it makes sense that when we're in spaces like this, in church, or maybe you're just watching here, or maybe we're around church people, we assume that it is just one more place with more rules for us to follow. In fact, maybe you have heard people say that being a Christian is just about following a bunch of rules. And if that's how you've thought about it, I totally get that. It's a really common idea. But just for today, I want you to consider this. What if we've gotten it wrong? What if following Jesus is just as much about the rules that you break as the rules that you follow? Like, what if I told you that being rebellious isn't always a bad thing? In fact, it can be the very thing that God invites us to do. So you may or may not know this, but lots of people would have called Jesus rebellious. And that seems strange to say because so many of us have assumed following Jesus is just about following the rules. But the truth is, Jesus often challenged the way that things had always been done. He disagreed, he debated, and sometimes he broke rules that were cultural or traditional, and it made everybody a little bit nervous. In fact, some powerful leaders were so bothered by Jesus that they made a plan to kill him. So, how do we know this happened? Well, a few people who knew Jesus well wrote down what happened in his life. And those documents have been passed down for generations. And one of those writers was his good friend, Jesus' good friend. His name was John. And this is what John wrote down in his record of Jesus' life. All right, this is John 13, verse 1. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So Jesus is with his closest followers, his disciples, sitting down for the feast of the Passover, and this is a time to remember the good things that God has done for the Israelite people when he freed them from the slavery in Egypt. And Passover happened every year, but this one was a bit different for Jesus because he knew that he was only days away from being arrested and put on trial for what would eventually lead to his death. So John continues this in John 13, 3 through 5. It says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. So keep in mind that this took place in the culture at the time that Jesus walked the earth, all right? So this was thousands of years ago. They didn't have cars. They didn't have bikes. The roads weren't paved, and there were no sidewalks. And they didn't have the latest LeBrons, the Off-Whites, or the Crocs, all right? So most likely they had a thin pair of sandals to protect their feet from the rough terrain because they literally walked everywhere that they went. Through grass, they went through mud, through dirt, through dust, and anything else that you can imagine that you'd find on the ground, all right? So I don't know about you, but I personally am not a huge fan of feet like right now. So I can't imagine the nastiness of feet back then. I wouldn't be into that stuff. So that's why foot washing was considered something a servant would do. No one would willingly touch everyone's gross feet except Jesus. It must have shocked everyone. Jesus, without saying a word, breaks a rule that had existed for centuries. In fact, it's a rule that still exists today, one that I think many of us follow without even thinking. And the rule is this: only do what you have to do. And isn't it true that's an unspoken rule in our world? Maybe you've heard people say, look out for number one, or worry about yourself, or do the minimum requirements. In other words, only do what you have to do. And it makes sense. After all, like you don't do homework you only do homework that counts for a grade. And you only run as many laps as your coach requires. And or maybe not even that. But you only volunteer as many hours as your club requires, or you only clean up when your mom threatens to ground you. So like, okay, I better do this. So I personally was an A, B student growing up. I did what I needed, but I never went above and beyond to get that extra credit. I was never like my intern, Chloe. She's just ridiculous. But I was happy about doing what I needed to get the B. I followed what was asked of me. Does following this rule make you a bad person? No. It makes you a normal human. This is one we all follow. In fact, one of the most common ways to live is to only do what you have to do. It's such a normal way of thinking, and it almost feels like a rule. And that's what makes Jesus' foot washing so remarkable. This was more than just doing something nice for his friends. Washing feet was going beyond what a normal human would do. It wasn't required, it wasn't expected, it wasn't the way that we do things. In one of his last days on earth, Jesus did the opposite of what anyone would have considered normal. And it was one of the greatest acts of rebellion in history. So when he had finished washing each of the disciples' feet, he said this in John 13:12-17. It says, "Do you understand what I have done for you?" He asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." So this was how Jesus rebelled. He saw a world where people looked out for themselves, only doing what they had to do for those that they wanted to do things for, and he refused to live by those rules. In other words, he rebelled in a way that honored God. He challenged what was normal or expected in a way that served others. He served people like him and people who were nothing like him. Jesus went out of his way to serve people that his society said didn't matter at all. He did what he didn't have to do, even when it cost him his reputation and ultimately his life. He loved them to the end. And as a result, he didn't just overthrow the system in Rome, he changed the world. And see, that's the thing about doing something you don't have to do. It sticks out. Like each one of these red dots amidst a mass of white dots. It gets people's attention. It disrupts the normal way of doing things. It changes people in a powerful way. So what does it look like for us to be rebellious enough to do something that we don't have to do? One idea is to start each day by praying this simple prayer. Say and pray this: God, here I am. Help me see ways I can help. When it comes to helping other people, it may not always be obvious. Sometimes I'm so busy, I don't even notice other people around me. But when I started praying that simple prayer, I began to see more opportunities than I realized. And I think you will too. Then as you see people that need help, the next thing is help them, even when you don't have to. It really is that simple. Maybe for you, that means helping the school janitor clean up after a spill if you see it. Or maybe it's doing chores at home without your parents having to ask you. Or maybe it's including someone who seems to be excluded. Or maybe it's spending time with your siblings, even if they're annoying. Maybe it's inviting somebody to sit with you who is different from you. Or maybe it's defending somebody who's being gossiped about. Or maybe it's saying something nice to the lunch lady, or carrying grocery bags for the single mom that you see at the store. Or maybe it's showing respect to the teacher that nobody seems to show respect for. Maybe that doesn't sound life-changing, and I get it. But chances are it has changed your life already. And here's what I mean. Do you remember a time when someone did something for you that they didn't have to do? Maybe they helped you when they didn't have to, or maybe they gave you something that was so generous that you didn't expect it, or maybe they forgave you when you didn't deserve it. The point is, when somebody does something they don't have to do for us, it's a powerful moment and we remember it. And the same thing is true when we do something out of the ordinary for others. And here's what I want you to think about. What would happen if people from Roots or people from your life group started doing things that we don't have to? Maybe it's for our schools or for our families, our sports teams, or maybe our jobs, maybe our community. When Jesus did what he didn't have to, it turned the world upside down. When you and I serve in a way that we don't have to, I think it can have a similar effect. That's why I want everyone here to be rebellious enough to do what you don't have to do. The truth is, some rules are good. Rules like wearing a seatbelt or driving the speed limit, or at least close to it, they keep us safe. Following them is a good idea, and we all know it. But at other times, ideas like selfishness are so much a part of our world, so normalized that they feel like rules that we have to obey. And when it comes to those, sometimes a little rebellion is a good thing. In fact, that's one of the reasons we have life groups, so that we can remind each other that we don't have to do things or live a certain way simply because it's normal or it's expected. We can go beyond what we have to do and serve others in a way that is not required. And we have groups to help us realize that we are not alone in our faith, that we have other rebels alongside of us fighting for Jesus. So this week, I hope that you can think about ways that you can serve, ways that you can show up for people, maybe in your school or even in your family, and even in ways that you can help each other. Whatever you decide, just be rebellious enough to do what you don't have to do. So let's pray. Father, I just thank you so much for those who are watching this right now. And God, I just pray over them right now that they can be rebellious, that they can stick out and stand out, not because they're doing bad things, but because they're doing things that are out of the normal. God, I pray that they stand out and that everyone can know about Roots, because we are a group that doesn't live according to what everyone else does, but we live according to what Jesus calls us to live. So we love you, Jesus. We thank you for your work that you did on the cross, that we can have this life. We pray this in your name. Amen. Thanks, guys. God bless you guys. We have one more week left next week, and Chloe will be teaching it, so you guys will hear from her. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Tyler. That was great. I hope you're encouraged to be rebellious enough to do what you don't have to do. Look for ways you can go above and beyond to help others. Now, please take a moment to fill out the Connect card linked in the description. This way, we can stay connected with you guys and pray for you throughout the week. You should also follow us on Instagram and TikTok for some great content, which are linked in the description as well. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you all have a great week. Bye!